Hello, I'm Bill Peschel, and this is Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents, a conversation with Karen Odden. Karen is the author of 5 books, all set in Victorian Britain. There are 3 standalones featuring a female amateur detective, and 2 in the Inspector Michael Corravan series, of which the latest is Under a Veiled Moon. Karen earned a PhD in literature at New York University, and her dissertation on 19th century railway disasters formed the background for her debut novel, A Lady in the Smoke, which was a USA Today bestseller. She's a member of Sisters in Crime and the Mystery Writers of America, and she lives in Scottsdale, Arizona with her husband and 2 children. Karen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. I'm very much looking forward to talking with you. I have a fondness for history, and particularly Victorian history. And I think probably one of the best descriptions of what you do and how you approach your work is that you write as if Charles Dickens is writing a mystery. The level of detail you put in to your books is, and I mean the kind of personal detail, when you're talking about say in Under the Veiled Moon, about this is involving a shipwreck on the Thames, the Irish dynamite campaign against England, political maneuvering, even down to priest holes in churches in London. You seem to have a very good grasp on information. Is that something you have always been interested in?
My interest in Victorian London actually began my first year in grad school. I took a very good Victorian novel writing class with a gifted professor named Carolyn Dever. And I was lucky that I became interested in the Victorian era. And I was lucky that NYU had a very deep roster of professors. There were 4 of them, actually, all in Victorian, and I found one of them who would, be willing to do my, to work on my dissertation with me. And I think that because my dissertation really was about Victorian railway disasters and the representations of them in medical literature, legal literature, newspapers, magazines, periodicals, cartoons, poems, songs. I mean, they were everywhere. There was kind of a national obsession with railway crashes, kind of the way that we feel about maybe hacking now. It's kind of something that we kind of live with it. We know about it. We guard against it. We talk about it, that kind of thing. That's like the closest analogy, I guess. And because I was doing so much research into the history, I started getting my fingers on all kinds of other primary material. And the Victorian era is astonishing because, one of the great things about it is there's a lot available. And a lot of people were writing. They were keeping journals and writing op-ed pieces for the papers. And all this kind of stuff. So you had all sorts of information readily available. And then if you actually go to London, London itself still has, Victorian London is still very much present. The city speaks to you. It has plaques and little markers everywhere. This person lived here, and this is what he did, and and this is where this bomb happened, and this bridge was built on so and so a date. And so the city talks to you, and a lot of it is 1800s, which is great.
As a matter of fact, what I found interesting is that for one of your books, it was the music hall book, Dangerous Duet.
Yes,
you found one of the original music halls that still exist, and you got a chance to walk through it.
I did. Wilton's Music Hall. It's in Grace's Alley, Grace's Lane. It's in Whitechapel, near where the Jack the Ripper murders happened. It's all gentrified now, of course, but the Victorian Music Hall stands. And when I found it, the reason I found out about it actually was I went to the Royal Academy of Music, because the whole premise of that book was based on Fanny Dickens, Charles's older sister. She had been a very gifted musician, and she studied with one of Beethoven's protégés, like that kind of gifted musician.
Yeah.
But it was 1820s, and the Dickens family was notoriously sort of in and out of debt, and she didn't have money for tuition, so she ended up having to quit her studies at the Royal Academy. But, and so when I went there actually to the Royal Academy just to, visit and see what it was like and that kind of thing. And there happened to be a whole, there's a little museum within it, and there was a whole presentation on music halls. And when I got talking to the librarian, gotta love librarians. I love librarians. And she says, Oh, well, did you know that there's still one music hall that is in existence that still puts on plays and is still used in movie sets and MTV videos? I mean, all kinds of things. She says it's Wilton's and it's not very far from here. You can walk. So after I kind of did my whole Royal Academy of Music thing, I headed down to Wilton's and I walked in, and the floor, honestly, it was so cool. The floor was sodden with like all of the beer that had been spilled on it. It was soft and mushy, and there was a nail, and I tripped over the nail, and I thought, oh, that's got to go in my book. And then I walked around the corner, and there was the music hall, and it was beautiful. You know, it's done in this kind of dusty blue color with lots of gold, and there were all these pillars because the original owner believed that he believed that if everything was done in patterns of 5, it would protect against fire. And so he had, for example, each one of the pillars has 25 turns on it. And there are, I think it's 10 pillars. And they actually moved the wall in so that it would be 65 feet instead of 68 feet from the stage. All this crazy stuff. I mean, who knows why? But to find all that information out and be able to actually get my hands on it and get my feet where those people walked. And then I could set my novel there, because I could stand there at the back of that hall and think, okay, I can put Nell Hallam in a piano alcove right over there, and she's going to earn money playing piano so that she can attend the Royal Academy. Of course, this is 1870s. That's when the music halls were really big, not in the 1820s when Fanny Dickens didn't have that option.
Yeah, and she's disguised as a man, as I understand, so that
yes,
she can do that.
Yes, because the men got paid 20 shillings a week and the women got paid 10.
Mm-hmm. And if I understand correctly, because I visited the website talking about it, if you see the first Sherlock Holmes movie with Robert Downey Jr., yes, that hall is in there. They actually used it, of course, as one of the sets. Yes,
it's the one where there's a Cossack who's running around, and it's mayhem. He and Sherlock Holmes are chasing each other around this music hall, and that's Wilton's. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, let's orient the reader to the books that you have out, because I understand you started with, you have not a series, but you have 3 books featuring female amateur detectives, yes, A Lady in the Smoke, with Lady Elizabeth Fraser. What can you tell us about her? I understand she was kind of unsuccessful at the seasons.
Oh, alas, yes, poor Elizabeth. So she, there's rumors going around that her fortune is not what it should be or what it was. And so she has an unsuccessful, I think it's her 4th season. And so she and her mother, who is unfortunately addicted to laudanum, get on a train. And in 1874, north of London, they're heading home and they're in a train wreck. And that's what sort of kicks off that book. So I really plundered my dissertation for that first novel. So, yeah. But each one of those first 3 books, that one, A Dangerous Duet and A Trace of Deceit, each one of them is about a young woman who is pulled into some sort of mystery because someone she loves is injured or murdered.
Yeah. And they're part of a particular unique world. Of course, Lady Fraser is part of the gentry, the peerage. She's part of the aristocracy. So that forms her character as well as what she's able to do and not do.
Yes.
Nell Hallam being a pianist in, I'm going to say the Smoke book.
Dangerous Duet. Yep.
Thank you. Dangerous Duet. Yeah. I don't know why I say Smoke there. I must have, my notes are screwed up, but she's like 19. And so you have scenes from the music world, the music hall world in there as well. And then the painter Annabelle Rowe in Trace of Deceit, which I have that there as well. You have the painting world, the auction world, art theft, forgery, government scandal. So it's like you picked a different part of the Victorian world and just set a story in it. Does that sound right?
Yes. Yeah, that's a very adept description of it, because I did begin with a certain aspect that I thought would be interesting to readers. And it was railways, music halls, and thieving gangs, and then art and auction and forgery. I had worked at Christie's auction house in the 1990s. And that was sort of the beginning point for my 3rd book, A Trace of Deceit, with set in the art world.
Was there experiences there that you found applicable to your book?
Yes. Actually, in fact, there is one scene that is lifted almost directly out of real life. There's all kinds of scandals at Christie's, which I'm not going to talk about. But the exciting thing that happened on November 11th, 1994, was there was going to be a rare book auction, and one of the pieces that was being auctioned was Leonardo da Vinci's Codex Hammer. It's a 32-page manuscript with the Vitruvian man, in the circle with his arms outstretched.
Yep.
And that's on one of the pages. And it happened to be my birthday. I was actually doing marketing work for them, but I snuck down the back hallway and I stood against the wall and watched the auction room while this piece was being sold. And Stephen Massey, who was the head of the rare books room, he was up, rare books department, he was up at the front of the room, and the room was packed and everyone was murmuring. And there's all this kind of whispering, and then there was across the way there was a phone bank. This is still very kind of old school, but it's the 90s. And so there would be, for example, someone wanted to bid but couldn't actually be in the room. They would be on the phone with one of the Christie's operators. And so they began the bidding, I think around $6 million, and it went to 7, and then 8, and then 10, and then 12, and 14. And it's just mounting, and it's between one person in the room and one person on the phone. And it gets to 28 million, and it goes to the person on the phone. $28 million. And I mean, it's an extraordinary, one of a kind object, obviously, but that's a lot of money. And so, everyone's kind of finished murmuring and talking and everything else. And I go running up the back stairs because I've got to get back to work. And I hear some people talking, and someone says, well, who did it? Who bought it? And they said, oh, it's like Bill Cates or something. He's in computers. Well, this is before Windows 95 came out, so Bill Gates wasn't necessarily a household name. Anyway, so Bill Gates bought it. He separated all of the pages, put them between glass, and it toured the world. I think it started out in Japan or something, and he wanted people to see it. That's why I bought it.
I think they renamed it the Gates Codex now, didn't they?
They did, and then they changed it again, I think. I don't know what it's called now, but it's that moment. I mean, I got into Christie's because I did marketing. I didn't know anything about art. Like, I didn't know a Modigliani from a Miro. I mean, like nothing. And I was standing there with my back to the wall with, a bunch of journalists and all kinds of people milling around, and watching that room and the energy that's around art was thrilling. And what I recognize is, like, I like art. I like to go to museums. I appreciate it, and on a certain level for what I know. But what I really like are the stories around art. The heists, the forgeries, the bizarre moments when someone buys something and it turns out to be something different, and there are all kinds of them. There are really great stories out there about art.
Oh yeah, the one that was a favorite of mine, I put in a book called Writers Gone Wild, was the theft of the Mona Lisa in 1912 that involved Pablo Picasso, because he had a habit of going into the back rooms and just saying, oh, I'll take this object, I'll take that, and use them as kind of inspiration for his paintings.
Right.
And that was, again, that was so strange that somebody could walk into the museum and just say, oh, and just pick it up and walk out with it. Of course, you can't do that anymore.
No, that's...
Yeah. And then let's see, that's the 3 books we've got. And now you've got the 2 books featuring Inspector Michael Corravan, an Irish detective for Scotland Yard. Why did you switch to a male detective?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. One of them was practical, which was that my editor had left HarperCollins for her dream job at another company. And so I wasn't going to be with HarperCollins anymore. And so that, I had to kind of I felt like I needed to break away from the mold. I needed to do something new and different and fresh. And those, as you said, those first 3 books really had taken an aspect of Victorian culture and then said, okay, well, let me find a young woman. Let me put her in a problem and situate her. Down at Dark River began very differently, to be honest. It began with a story that I found in, I believe it was a New Yorker. I threw the article away and I wish I could find it again. It was a story about injustice and the law in the United States in the present day. And it was about a young woman in Alabama who had been jaywalking across a quiet street. A car comes flying around the corner, hits her. The man is drunk. And she's put in the hospital for months. And when her family sues on her behalf, the judge awards her only $2,000. And so this, wealthy white man in his expensive car got away with something. And so in the aftermath, I mean, that's a horrible story in and of itself. There's all kinds of things wrong there. But in the aftermath, the girl's father threatened the judge's daughter. And in that moment, it really pulled me up short. So, and these are sometimes when writers talk about what inspires you to write a book, it's the moments when you're and you kind of feel your chest pull back and you're kind of thinking to yourself, wow, this is surprising. This is startling. And it stuck with me for weeks afterwards. I was thinking about it because I came to the conclusion, I feel like he was trying to, get the judge to understand what it was to almost lose a child. In some ways, this act of what looked sort of like revenge was a last-ditch howl for empathy and understanding. So it got me thinking about injustice and failures of empathy and revenge and the links among those things. And then I thought, well, I need to figure out, how do I set this in the Victorian period? Because that's where I live and that's where I belong. And so I came up with, and I wasn't 10 pages in writing when I realized I can't do this with an amateur woman sleuth. I mean, this is all about jurors and lawyers and doctors and men. And I need a man. That's like the only time in my life I'm ever going to say that, but I needed a man. And so I created Michael Corravan, and he's kind of a lot like Matthew Hallam in A Trace of Deceit. He's a Scotland Yard inspector, but Matthew was kind of more of a middle class, well-educated, a little more polished. Michael Corravan's rough around the edges. He grows up a former thief and bare knuckles boxer, a dock worker from Whitechapel, and he's got his baggage.
Yeah, and in the second book, Under a Veiled Moon, we see some, and I have to talk about it because this is the book I read. I didn't read the first one, but I did read the second one, and he's part of an Irish family. Obviously, he's Irish himself. And I thought what struck me about it is that they are Irish, but they're not talking. They're not talking in dialect. They're not talking stage Irish. They're not doing anything of the sort. How did you decide how you wanted to handle the Irish accent, the Irish character?
To be honest, I tried to handle that with a very light. I kind of feathered that in here and there in bits and pieces, but I find if it were going to be only an audiobook, I might have made more of it. But reading dialect when you're dropping off letters and inserting, it can be very distracting. It can really pull you out. For me, it pulls me out of the story sometimes when I start having to read it out loud in order to understand what's going on. But the other thing is that, Michael Corravan, by age 31, he's been in the Scotland Yard or the Metropolitan Police for 12 years. And so he isn't really a product of just Whitechapel anymore. And when I was working on trying to find his voice, one of the things that I would do is I had some 1870s police reports, and I would read them out loud to myself before I would begin writing in the morning. Because of course they're written by Victorian men. So just to try and get the cadence and the sound of them in my ear, I'd begin to write that way.
Yeah, I think it was a great choice because I've have read a lot of what you might call stage Irishmen, Mr. Dooley's columns, in which he's writing in an accent that is absolutely impenetrable nowadays. You shouldn't write like that. So better to be under than too much. I've lost my train of thought, unfortunately. Have you found a difference between writing a male character and a female character after this? Is there something that has come to mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, my first 3 books, I feel like I was still figuring it out. And I think that young women, who are thrown into problems probably drew a lot on the books I read as a child. Like, I found them in my grandmother's library. We used to go there. I grew up in Rochester, New York, and they lived in Bergen, which was kind of the 20 minutes away. It's a very, very small rural town with one blinking light and one gas station and one convenience store. And that was pretty much it. And so we would go out there on Sundays, and, the other adults would all play bridge, and I'd be like, okay, well, what am I going to do? So I go to my grandmother's library, and she had a great library. It was sort of 3 sides. And, and then, you walk in and there were 3 sides of books, and there was a stone fireplace, and there was this very 1970s chair, one of those ones that's kind of shaped like this that would rock back and forth, forward and back. And she had everything in there. She had history. She had bodice rippers. I discovered those later. She had Mary Stuart. She had Daphne du Maurier. And so the Daphne du Maurier, Mary Stuart, Victoria Holtz were all in this one shelf. And she pointed them out to me one day. I think she wanted to steer me away from the bodice rippers. And so I grabbed one of Mary Stuart's books. I think it was This Rough Magic. And I started reading. And so every Sunday I would just go and I would pull down one of the books and I'd read the whole book. And that's what I would do. And then we would all have dinner, and then we'd all go home. And I think that those books laid down a track in my brain that I really depended on for those first 3 books to help me structure them. Young woman in exotic location. I mean, to me, 1870s London was exotic. And she, there's a romance, there's a trouble, there's a murder, and she has to kind of find her way out of it.
Yeah. I've discovered from reading your book, you're not really you're writing a historical novel, a historical mystery with a romance. It's not a historical romance. Right. Although I do find, I find the way you've handled it very appealing. It's that there's a comfort that you can get, especially like I assume, like for Michael, after a day out there chasing bodies or dealing with everything that he's dealing, having comfort in a relationship. And that seems to be a very nice way of handling it in a historical context, as opposed to what the demands are placed on the tropes of a romance.
Right.
Have you ever wanted to write a romance?
It's funny that you ask that. No, it's not. It's just that I'm actually working on a standalone right now, and the backbone of it, not the first half so much, when she's kind of going to London and becoming a thief, and then getting sent to a penal colony in Australia in the 1850s, but she when she gets to the penal colony, she meets someone and they fall in love. And so the second half of the book really is structured by a romance, much more so than these other books. I mean, in Down a Dark River and Under a Veiled Moon, the way he meets Belinda Gale is because someone throws a brick through her window in protest for a woman that she had been inviting to her soirees. It was a very avid feminist who was speaking about birth control. And so this person who threw the brick was like, you shouldn't be having her at your soiree. So I'm going to throw the brick, break into your house, tear your whole office apart. And so he's called to the scene of the crime. That's how they meet. And I like Belinda Gale a lot. She's one of my favorite characters because she's based on 4 different women novelists of the period. So I sort of took pieces of Mary Elizabeth Braddon and Mrs. Henry Wood and George Eliot and kind of mushed them all together to make Belinda Gale. And
that's wonderful.
And she's an outlier. But there were a lot of women novelists who were actually supporting their families, by their own work. But she is an outlier in that she had promised her father that she was not going to marry until she knew someone for a certain period of time, because he said that, people change and you need to really know someone. And anyway, so she's unusual, and yet she's more usual. You won't necessarily find someone like her in Victorian fiction, but you will find someone like her in Victorian real life in the 70s.
there were numerous women who
Yeah.
lived very independent lives, some that they traveled to Arabia and wrote books about what they found there. And they are fascinating women.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Are we going to see Michael and Belinda again in another book later?
You know, I'm really hoping so. I haven't heard yet back from my publisher. I think that probably will depend on how these two books do. But I'm hoping, because I have a really good idea for one where Corravan is up against an all-women thieving gang that's based on the 40 Elephants, which operated out of Lambeth in the 1880s.
Yeah. Well, I hope you do. I hope you get another contract, because
Thank you.
I really like the books, and I hope our readers will check them out. If they want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
I have a website that hooks up to everything. It's www.Karen, that's Karen, Odden with 2 Ds, ODDEN.com. And I also have a newsletter that comes out every 6 weeks that you can subscribe to. It always features a giveaway from another woman author and an essay by her. It's just sort of my way of supporting other women authors. And it always has some of my book news and a writer's tip and that kind of stuff. And it only comes out every 6 weeks because frankly, it takes a lot of time to put it together. So I don't do it very often.
All right. Well, a half hour has passed very quickly. So I want to thank you, Karen, for talking with us at the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. And I hope for our people watching us, I hope that your best book is the one you're reading right now. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents podcast is sponsored by the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. The store is open with limited hours, plus we accept appointments and offer a drive-by service. The store will also ship books to your home, including those from the Peschel Press Mystery line, including our annotated editions of novels by Agatha Christie and Dorothy L. Sayers. To learn more, visit the store at www.mysterybooksonline.com. And thank you for listening.